So hi everybody. Thanks so much for coming to listen to this talk. I'm excited about this talk. So it's not often that somebody that has worked with me comes in and presents. We've had one with Nadia a few weeks ago, and Cora, who's a former master's student, a graduate, who's now working in corporate, trying to do some good in the world and helping people achieve kind of financial proficiency or access. And today she'll be talking to us about her project that she did as a thesis. I think it was pretty unusual back then in 2018 when I just joined HKU. Um, she was a brave soul trying to figure out what is a replication. Back then, we didn't really have a lot of resources. I wasn't really clear on what is it that I'm trying to do. So we had like a general idea, but Cora really did some remarkable work here. So with very little resources and a lot of uncertainty and lack of clarity, she was able to bring this all the way to the end. And I don't just mean the thesis submission, but also bringing this to a publication in what we consider to be a reputable top-tier journal, SPPS, in our social psychology field. I want to say just because we've had quite a few experiences with trying to submit stuff to journals, and I want to say that up till now, in all of my academic journey, this has been by far the most positive review that I've ever received. Basically, not really getting any comments. So both the editor and the reviewer were very enthusiastic. So I just like wrote down what it is that they said in the decision letter. So in this case, the replication effort had a very large sample, and he's consulted with the expert, and they both agree that this is overall a job well done. I never get this kind of decision letter, so this is quite remarkable. The reviewer was saying stuff like this was a well-conducted replication study, so everything was done as it should be. And SPPS is not an easy journal to get into. What's more than that, even before the publication, I think it was a few weeks after Cora submitted the thesis and we uploaded this to the Open Science Framework, suddenly, to our great surprise, this appeared in the Psychology Today. Patrick Heck wrote something, and I really love this conclusion. I hope that this will be like an inspiration to some of the students, maybe hearing also from Cora of her side of things. But what Patrick wrote is in the conclusion in Psychology Today is, I'm particularly impressed by the work because not only was the replication attempt done right with a pre-registered plan, complete transparency, including open data, theoretically interesting extension, but also because the project was led by a master's student. And this is good evidence that rigorous replications can be run by researchers who do not yet have a PhD. That's just perfect. So I think that's a good opening for us to hear a bit from Cora. What was the replication? What was the extension? What was the whole project? And what was her experience and takeaway from the whole thing? So thank you, Cora.
Thanks so much, Philly, for the very generous introduction. That brought back memories of that half-year journey we had. So I'm really pleased to be here to share a little bit about the master's thesis I did, working with Philly back in 2019, I believe. So as the title suggests, this paper we focused on the better than average effect, and more specifically, it's a direct replication of a study done by Mark Alicke back in the 80s. So just an overview of what I'll be covering in the next 40 minutes or so. I want to start off giving you some background about the study and what informs our attempt to replicate this paper. And then I'll move on to cover just enough information for you to get a sense what the researcher was trying to achieve in the original article. Before I move on to talk about what are some of the adjustments we made to the replication, what is the extension that we added to the paper, and finally, just to take a step back, so beyond just the research project itself, I'm quite keen to share a little bit about some of my reflections on this whole journey. And hopefully you'll walk away with a little reassurance or confidence that doing a replication is a worthy attempt, especially if, for instance, you are an undergraduate student looking for an extra project that you want to work on towards the end of your psychology degree. So that might be something that's of interest to you. So I know that it's about to be exam period coming up at HKU. So regardless if you're part of the teaching staff or if you're a student, that would mean work for you. And on that note, I do want to ask you a question. How hardworking are you? So on a scale of 1 to 7, could you just have a think about this question? Feel free to share your answers with everyone in the chat, or you can keep it to yourself, but I just want you to have a think. Now, I'll assume that you have done the mental effort already, so I will just move on to my next question. How hardworking is an average Hong Konger, do you think? Again, on a scale of 1 to 7. In case you're listening to this and you're not dialing in from Hong Kong, try to imagine an average person that is based in your city. Now, then I'll just move on to talk a bit about the phenomenon itself. So while the questions that I showed you just now is not directly similar to what the author really did in the study, this would give you like a general idea of what the better effect than average effect is about. So essentially, people tend to think that they are better than the average peer. So if we take the average of all your answers, theoretically, compare how you rate yourself versus others, it's likely that the self-rating on average will be higher than the ratings that you give to the average Hong Konger for this positive trait, hardworking. So you all think that you are ahead of the curve, theoretically. So this is a phenomenon that is quite well documented in the literature, but what causes the effect is still debatable. So chances are you are the little cat on the left, which thinks that you're a lion, and so people have a tendency to self-enhance, and they want to feel positive about themselves. That is one camp of psychologists who have this belief, and this is again like lots of literature around the space. On the other hand, there are also researchers who believe that it has something to do with how we process information. Maybe you missed the bullet. So inaccurate information processing could be an answer. And this has something to do with the way the question is phrased. Because when we think about the average other, you do need to make that effort to try to think, what does this abstract entity mean? What does it really mean to be an average Hong Konger when there are so many different individuals out there? And that is why this is something that is continual to be under debate. And for that reason, we want to investigate further. Another reason for making this attempt at replication is that many studies fail to replicate. So these are just some examples of the failed attempt at replication that are that are covered in the media. There is the marshmallow test, which perhaps many of you in psychology classes might have come across, and also the ego depletion theory. Again, something that is under heavy discussion earlier when the failed replication came up. So it is worth questioning how the researchers really arrived at their answers in the first place, and really revisit the studies to see if there are any adjustments we can make, and whether the effect sizes are really an accurate reflection of the phenomenon. And we chose the paper done by Alicke back in 1985 for a few reasons. So this is a very important article in this space. And at the time of writing, it has been cited more than 1,000 times on Google Scholar. And if you think about the topic itself, how we view ourselves versus how we look at others, this has some interesting implications on our mental health and also practically how we look at education and the workplace. So this is something that we do want to explore more. And at the time, there was also no direct replication. So thinking about the method and how the researcher approached the answers, this is again something worth looking at. And finally, the findings themselves. So in the next part, I'll go through the effect sizes with you, and that would become clearer. But when you look at the effect sizes, they're quite unusual in the sense that they are very large. So this is again something that sparked our interest when we selected this article in the first place. On that note, I want to move on to the next part where we talk about the original article that we replicated. So to zoom in to the assumption a little bit more, people want to feel positive about themselves. So when we try to evaluate ourselves based on thinking about what are some traits, adjectives that describe me, chances are people would think that the positive traits that are good to have by mainstream standards, are more descriptive, more characteristic of themselves. Whereas for the bad traits, because you want to draw distance from these character flaws, it's more likely that you would think, oh, this is not me. But because we are human, we've got to have some flaws. So if we want to maintain our integrity, which is something that we all want to do, that's something that we have to adjust in our self-evaluation. And that's where the role of controllability, how much you can exert your control in order to change these characteristics, this becomes an important factor. So have a look at this adjusted diagram here. So we added whether a trait is controllable or uncontrollable. So just something simplified to illustrate that idea. Then people would be more likely to think that, okay, for these positive traits that are controllable, meaning I can acquire them through sufficient effort, it's something that I can eliminate, then people would tend to think that these are more characteristic of themselves. Whereas for bad traits that are uncontrollable, likewise, because by saying that it is uncontrollable, you can alleviate your responsibility. You can say that I'm born with this trait, I'm inherently lazy, just as an example. Therefore, it makes us feel better about ourselves so that we are not personally accountable for these flaws that we have. And by the same token, for bad traits that are controllable, then it's people would tend to want to again keep their distance from them, because otherwise it would mean that you're perhaps not a great person for having these traits that you can eliminate if only you work hard enough to improve on these areas. So this might also still sound a little abstract, but things will be put into perspective as we go through a couple more slides. So how did the author examine this? What he did was that he asked college students to rate various traits taken from the paper you see here, written by Anderson in the 60s. So the question that was posed to the participants was, to what extent is each trait characteristic of you or the average college student? Again, the reference point for these people. So comparing between self and also the average peer. And because in this case, it is college students that are the participants, that is what they are basing their self-evaluation on. And then we take into account the role of desirability and controllability. By desirable trait, what he meant there is that it's a trait that is good to have for an average American college student. Controllable would mean that it's a trait that can be created or eliminated through sufficient control. And as for the hypotheses, there are two. And to simplify it a little bit, in a nutshell, people would perceive the following traits as more characteristics of themselves than of the average peer if they are more desirable. For instance, reliable is a highly desirable trait, as the findings later suggest. And second, the role of controllability could affect how people view the different traits as well. So for traits that are very desirable and very controllable, so something that is good and you can control whether you have that trait or not, such as cooperative, you can choose whether you work well with others. That is something that people would find more characteristic of themselves. And for low desirability, low controllability, such as insecure, people would also tend to find it more characteristic of themselves. Just a little clarification there for low desirability, low controllability. What this means is that, again, if you recall that simplified diagram we gone through in the previous slide, because that's something, while it's negative, people feel that, oh, there's not much we can do about it. That's why it's still not a threat to their maintaining their self-esteem, and it's something that they could feel that they can identify with. So that is the assumption behind this study. Now, if we move on to look at the design of the study, I hope you can see my screen still. Okay. So there are two waves of data collection. So for the first wave, the author first had an initial sample of over 160 college students, rating traits in terms of how desirable they are or how controllable they are. And after collecting all these findings, he did two things. One is to remove the synonyms so that the traits are distinctive enough from each other. Second is to divide the traits into different levels of ratings. So what we've got left is about 154 traits. And in the second wave, that's where the self and other ratings are made. So going back to that question, to what extent do you think that these traits are characteristic of you or the average college student? And one thing to note here is that it's within subjects design, meaning that the participants are either assigned to first rate from their self perspective and then rate from the other perspective, and the other way around. So they all need to rate from both perspectives. Now, you might wonder, so what does it really mean by dividing the traits into different levels by ratings? So this might be a bit clearer if you look at this table. So traits are divided into 4 levels of desirability and 2 levels of controllability, so that you could they are grouped into 8. They're categorized into 8 groups, and then with that, the researcher then compared the differences of the self minus other ratings in relation to these two other attributes. And the dependent variable here, as you see in the text in blue, is the self ratings and the other ratings. So having gone through the design, let's have a look at the results of the study. So here you will find that the first hypothesis, there's support for that. So the desirable traits are found to be more characteristic of the self than the other, according to the findings. And you might notice from the table on the right here, the effect size is in fact very large. And similarly, for the second hypothesis, there's also support for that. So if you look at the trend here, a downward trend. So first look at the y-axis. So that is like the basically self minus other ratings. And by that, a positive value would mean that people think that these are more characteristic of themselves than others. A negative value would mean that it's more characteristic of other people. And from here, you will notice that starting from the beginning of the line, traits that are high control and high desirability are rated as more characteristic of the self. So considering this downward trend, we would consider that there is the hypothesis is supported in the study. And just summarizing the effect sizes in the table here as well, you would find that the effect sizes, how large they are. And just to give you reference, so as I was preparing for these slides, I just revisited some of the sources, and one suggested that for partial eta square, this unit for effect size, 0.14 would indicate a large effect. So that gives you a perspective of how large the effect sizes are found in this study. Now, having covered enough background, let's move on to the replication and the extension that we did in this study. So first, let's have a look at the adjustments. So while this is not an exhaustive list of all the things we have changed to try to improve the design, these would be worth highlighting in particular. First is that for the sample that we used, instead of US college students, we used American Amazon MTurk workers that are recruited online. And the reason for this change is that this would be more representative of the population as it's a broader age range. And also, if you could, looking at the paper more closely, you'll notice that the college student sample that was originally used, these are students that took an introductory psychology class. So potentially it's further biased sample there. So by making this change, what we hope to achieve is to get a broader American perspective, like from a population of a wider age range. In terms of the scale, no change to that, but we're also conscious of the need to change that to average American, so that people understand that, okay, we're really rating, basing this self-evaluation against an average peer that is representative enough. So with all these changes in mind, with regard to the replication, I want to then move on to talk about the extension that we added to this paper. One question that came up in our research around the background of this paper is whether desirability confounds with commonness. What this means is that whether by commonness, what we mean is how frequently displayed a trait is. And in fact, one researcher did suggest that potentially it's because traits like being polite is more, these traits are more often displayed by regular people compared to a trait like rude. So people would find it more descriptive of themselves, just simply because you perform that behavior a bit more. Another perspective that we have found is that those with higher self-esteem see their own desirable traits as less common. So again, going back to the little cat looking at the mirror thinking that they're a lion, for those who want to self-enhance, chances are you would think it's the positive trait that you have is special because you want to feel better about yourself. So this is the assumption, some questions that we hope to answer. when we designed this extension. And what we did is to add commonness ratings of the traits as a dependent variable. So the question we asked to participants is, to which degree is each of these traits common among the average American? With that, the hypothesis that we had is that for the other ratings, the trait desirability is positively associated with commonness, meaning you see that often in others. People, again, using polite as an example, people are often polite to each other. Therefore, it is associated with trait commonness. And for self ratings, desirability is negatively associated with commonness. Again, going back to the tendency for people to self-enhance, we assume that they'd like to think that it's special. The positive trait that they have is special. Therefore, it is seen as less common. So we'll come back to the findings of the extension later, but now I want to just go back to, broadly speaking, the study itself, the sample size. So because of the adjustments we are making to the design, we're using a considerably larger sample here. And given that the effect sizes that were detected in the original study would be seen as unusually large, we also took an extra step to use a sample that is 2.5 times greater than the original when we designed the final sample, meaning the second wave of data collection. In terms of the participants, looking at the table here, you would find a brief overview. So one thing I'd like to draw your attention on is going back to the age of the participants. As I hinted earlier, just showing how this the use of MTurk workers would allow us to access participants who come from a broader age range. And while the age of participants in the original paper is not reported, given that these are college students, we could have a guess where the age range would fall. So we would consider this an improvement to the design of the study. Now again, going back to the data collection. So you will notice that this is largely similar to the to the original article, as we're seeking to keep our replication attempt as close as possible to make it a direct replication. One thing that we did change is to add commonness ratings as a condition in the second wave, just so we can measure it as a dependent variable and investigate those hypotheses. Before we talk about the findings, we have to consider what does success look like for replication like this. So we, having consulted different sources, we've landed on this evaluation criteria. So here you will find the table, a diagram here, showing what it means for us to achieve success in the replication. If we detect that the effect sizes for all hypotheses are in the same direction and include the original effect size, regardless if it's stronger or weaker, we'll consider it a success. If there's no signal or it's in the opposite direction, then it's failure. So we've considered this hypothesis by hypothesis, and this will become clearer as we look at the results. First, take a look at the plot here. That's for the findings for desirability. Now again, y-axis, self minus other ratings, meaning that if it's a positive value, people think that it is more characteristic of themselves than of others. Seeing the upward trend here means that the more desirable the trait is, the more people think that it's characteristic of themselves compared to the average American. So there is support for the first replication hypothesis. Second is the role of desirability and controllability. So here you will find that there are two lines, two slopes on this in this graph. An upward trend, a steeper line, as you see here, for high controllability. So very similar to the original study. So meaning that if the trait is not just very desirable, but also very controllable, people are more likely to think that this it resonates with them, so it's characteristic of them. And likewise, if it is low desirability and low controllability, people would think that this is more characteristic of themselves. So having looked at this different, like the trends that we have identified in the study, let's take a look at the comparison of the effect sizes. So coloring these in green so that it's easier for you to see what are the replication successes, what are the inconclusive findings. So for desirability and controllability, we have found that they're both consistent in direction. And it's worth highlighting that the effect for desirability remains very strong here. 0.78 is the original. Replication is 0.54. While they're not different units, given the change of the analyses, this is still like a very high value. And that is, in itself, is an important finding that we're quite happy about. And then for the extension, looking at the role of trait commonness and the better than average effect, what we have found here is that we found support for trait desirability, meaning that for traits that are more desirable, they are also seen as more common. Although this hypothesis, like for the extension, isn't fully supported for the self. So people don't think, to put it in plain language, people don't think, like from our study, what we found is that there isn't a tendency for people to think that desirable traits are less common if they find them more characteristic of themselves. So coming to reflections. So while we said at the beginning that it is a master's program, this thesis that I did was part of this program. In fact, for those of you who might not be familiar with this program at HKU, it was in fact a one-year it was a one-year degree for those who don't have any previous knowledge of psychology. So that was quite an interesting ride, attempting a replication paper, doing a thesis on top of the coursework that need to complete during this one-year time frame, and also being someone who's fairly new to statistics. I think that it was a steep learning curve, but it was, I would say, a very worthwhile journey, and it's something that I'd look back and think I'm really glad I have done it. And this might put things into perspective. So I hope you can see this timeline here. So this is a 6-month project starting in about January, when we did some of the groundwork and pre-registered the paper on Open Science Framework. And then as we continue to work on the coding and the data collection, we realized that there are some changes that we want to make sure that we are doing it right. So we did make some revisions to our pre-registration before really fleshing out the manuscript. So you'll notice that a lot of the hard work is done at the beginning when we're really trying to get the foundation right. Lots to like calculating effect sizes, looking at really the research method, what is something that we can adjust. So having made those changes, then the thesis itself was submitted in January, so 1 month later. And then, like what Philly mentioned at the beginning, the manuscript, well, there are some revisions that were done in collaboration with a co-author who kindly made all those very good changes to make it better. And it was then accepted for publication by a journal. So that was pretty much it. So that was I think that for just try to compare it with a thesis that was perhaps like if you come up with your own topic, I think the journey might be quite different because I think that it was quite tough at the beginning, but then it gets easier because um, it's everything is already clearly laid out. You've already designed how you want to go about collecting the data and what are some things that we plan to do if it's not if it doesn't go as planned. So while there are still uncertainties, as you would imagine would happen in any research process, I think that there was a lot of clarity and guidance on what to do. So I think, Philly, you were very humble at the beginning when you said there weren't a lot of resources back then. I think even when I was starting in 2019, I think the resources that were made available to me, well, by you, were very helpful already for me to figure out some of the questions. And also, there's always like people you can consult to figure out how else you can approach a problem. So while this is all, this might come across as like an academic paper, and I do think that looking back on it, there are things that I have learned that would be very applicable to my work now, even as I work in a corporate. And I try to summarize them into 3 points, and I think these are I hope these are representative of my learning journey enough. But I think what this process taught me is that while the results are very important, what matters even more is how you go about approaching a problem. And as I mentioned earlier, because like so much time was spent on just making sure we set a good foundation and that things are clear and transparent enough so that we other people who have no knowledge of this not understand what's happening. I think that that helps me understand, even if the results, let's say, they aren't as what we found, it's not so-called a replication success, it still is a valuable finding itself. And I think that is a broader metaphor for learning anything, really, because regardless of the outcome, like as you try to work hard and put in the effort, like you will gain some knowledge, and that is also potentially helpful knowledge that you can share with others. Second is to keep things transparent and, if I may add, organized. Because like during the writing process, I think at one point I was unsure if I was providing too much information, or whether it is like to this level of detail, like how should I like organize things a bit better so that it's not an overwhelming amount of details I was trying to share with the readers. But all these little things, in fact, would help other readers understand what you're really trying to do. And because with that body of work that you're creating, people might pick it up and try to do further investigation. So all the things you're contributing there would be helpful. And even if it's something that you just document for your own reference so that you know not to make a mistake in the future, I think keeping all this information organized, it's helpful. And even in the corporate setting, I think this is something that has helped me. And finally, is to remember that there is something that you can contribute. I think the concept of doing a replication of, especially a classical paper in psychology that was highly cited, that idea might feel intimidating, or you might question, what is it? What is some practical contribution I can make, and how can I improve a study that is already seen as very good? And I think that, well, given like not just all the media coverage that has been out about the replication crisis, I think if we just think about the rationale of doing replication in the first place, it is still valuable knowledge that you're creating by showing people that here is another, let's say, direct replication, and here's what we found. And I think even as a student with not a lot of knowledge in this field, because you're doing so much work, just doing the reading, reading the original paper that you're trying to replicate so many times, perhaps you would catch something that other people might not have questioned before. And this is something that would perhaps inspire others to pay closer attention, not just to finding like the findings that they get in the research, whether it's significant or not, but just going back again to the process, whether it is people are going about problem in a way that is suitable. So, and if I try to apply it to the workplace setting, I think that this is also relevant. Let's say if you work in a team, sometimes you might not find yourself like in the right position to contribute an idea, but just have the confidence that if you have done the homework, perhaps the chance might arise, and then you would be able to share something useful for your team. So these are the three takeaways that I'd like to share just to wrap up my presentation. And I hope you have found something. There was something of interest, and if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So thank you so much for your time and for tuning in. Philly, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. That was wonderful. I'm just curious, like from your perspective, because I don't think a lot of students get to see that kind of thing. After you saw the entire submission to the journal, so the adaptation, a little bit of your thesis to the journal, and then some of the feedback and how that went. What's it like to see this from the student perspective?
I think it was a pleasant surprise to me, very much like you said, just to see how supportive and positive the reviewers were, and that they do recognize the work that we were doing. I think that was very encouraging. So being able to see that process is, yeah, I think interesting, and yeah, I would think it's a
What
great.
were your expectations prior to us submitting this? Did you have any? I'm just
Uh, I want to do a good job, I know for sure, but I wasn't expecting getting the manuscript accepted for publication. I thought that was a very nice and unexpected touch.
Also, I wonder, like maybe also in corporate life, but now when you see findings in the literature or in the media or perhaps in your job, do you view them differently? Do you approach them in a different way?
Yeah, I think that something as simple as its correlation, not causality, that's like uh, some like something that perhaps some psychology students or folks would find rule number one or just taken for granted. I think sometimes it does get misinterpreted, or it's not, people might not consider this very closely. I would say not just in the corporate sector, but just in general. So I think I'm really glad I had an opportunity to receive that training and really encouraged me to think a little bit more about that. Even though I struggled with statistics, I think that just having some really simple knowledge would help you think a little bit more.
Good. So perhaps the last question, because I think we don't get to talk to a lot of people who come from like corporate. So you've done a thesis and it's published and it's research, so you know a little bit about that, but you have chosen like a corporate industry field kind of job. Can you tell our students a little bit about the differences between, let's say, doing stuff as a student or as an academic to what it is that you experience in your everyday life, your job?
Hmm. I think that a lot of the skills or knowledge that you would expect in any workplace setting could be transferable. So even if you work in academic setting, I would imagine you still need a lot of people skills, project management. You need to be a good communicator. I think regardless of the path that you choose, these are all valuable skills that you can make use of, and just pushing yourself to do a little bit more work and trying different things during your studies. All of these experiences would help you get ready for the full-time work that you will eventually commit to.
All right, so I think we can wrap up. Thank you so much for coming to visit us and sharing your experience.
No
And then
worries.
hopefully we'll talk more in the future. So you're
Yeah.
always welcome to come visit us.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sure. That would be nice. Always nice to walk around the campus. And for those of you who are on the line, in case you have any further questions that you'd like to ask, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a message. So thank you again for taking the time to tune in.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.